Marcus Chen had always been good at breaking things. As a child, he broke his mother's favorite vase. As a teenager, he broke the school's supposedly unbreakable lockers. As a Marine, he broke enemy lines and enemy spirits. But he never thought he would break something that would change the fate of entire star systems. The Zephyrian Empire stretched across 47 worlds, each one more beautiful and terrifying than Earth could imagine. Their capital world, Nethys Prime, floated like a jewel in the darkness of space. Crystal spires reached toward purple skies, and floating gardens drifted between towers that defied gravity itself. It was here, in the grand temple of eternal dominion, that the sacred crown of ages had rested for over 10,000 years. Marcus wasn't supposed to be anywhere near the temple. Hell, he wasn't supposed to be on this planet at all. The diplomatic mission to establish trade relations with the Zephyrian Empire was meant for politicians and scientists, not a battle-hardened Marine sergeant with a tendency to speak his mind. But when pirates attacked their transport ship near the edge of Zephyrian space, everything went wrong. The emergency pods scattered like seeds in a storm. Marcus's pod, damaged and spinning out of control, crash-landed in the sacred garden surrounding the temple. When he crawled out of the wreckage, bleeding from a dozen cuts and covered in dirt, he found himself face to face with the most magnificent building he had ever seen. The temple rose before him like a mountain made of light. Its walls seemed to be carved from single pieces of rainbow crystal, and strange symbols pulsed with inner fire along its surface. Gardens of impossible beauty surrounded it, with plants that sang in the wind and flowers that glowed like tiny stars. But what caught Marcus's attention was the sound coming from inside the temple, screaming. Not screams of joy or celebration, but screams of pure terror and pain. Marcus had sworn an oath long ago, before he ever left Earth, before he ever saw the stars. He swore to protect the innocent, no matter where they were, no matter what species they belonged to. The screaming inside the temple sounded innocent enough to him. He limped toward the entrance, his emergency medical kit bouncing against his hip. The massive doors stood open, revealing corridors that seemed to stretch forever. Strange blue flames burned in floating braziers, casting dancing shadows on walls covered in alien artwork. The screaming grew louder as he moved deeper into the temple. Guards should have stopped him. Sensors should have detected him. But the temple was in chaos, and chaos was Marcus's oldest friend. He found the source of the screaming in the central chamber, a vast hall with a ceiling that seemed to reach up into infinity. Hundreds of Zephyrians filled the space, their tall, elegant forms draped in flowing robes of silver and gold. They were beautiful creatures, with pale blue skin that seemed to shimmer in the light and large, dark eyes that held intelligence and grace. But right now, those eyes were filled with horror. At the center of the chamber, on a platform of white stone, a young Zephyrian girl was chained to an altar. She couldn't have been more than 12 years old by human standards, though Marcus knew alien aging worked differently. Her small body shook with terror as robed figures moved around her, chanting in their musical language. Above the altar, suspended in midair by some kind of energy field, hung the sacred crown of ages. Marcus had seen many things in his years as a Marine, but he had never seen anything like this crown. It was beautiful and terrible at the same time, made from some kind of metal that seemed to shift between silver and gold and something darker. Jewels that looked like captured stars were set along its rim, and the whole thing pulsed with power that made the air itself tremble. The chanting reached a crescendo, and one of the robed figures raised a curved blade toward the sky. The crowd fell silent, and in that silence, Marcus heard the girl whisper a single word that he somehow understood despite not speaking Zephyrian. Help. That was all Marcus needed to hear. He had left his rifle in the crashed pod, but he still had his sidearm and something much more dangerous. 15 years of combat experience and absolutely no patience for people who hurt children. He moved like a shadow along the edge of the chamber, using the panicked crowd as cover. The ceremonial guards were tall and impressive-looking, but they were guards for a religious ceremony, not soldiers. Their armor was more for show than protection, and their weapons were ancient ritual blades rather than modern military equipment. Marcus had dealt with worse odds on a dozen different worlds. He struck fast and silent, taking down 2 guards before anyone noticed. The 3rd guard turned just in time to see Marcus's fist connect with his face. The Zephyrian dropped like a stone, his ornate helmet clattering across the floor. The crowd began to notice the disturbance, but Marcus was already moving toward the altar. The robed figure with the knife saw him coming and raised the blade to strike at the girl, but Marcus was faster. He tackled the priest, sending them both rolling across the platform. The knife went flying, spinning end over end through the air. Marcus watched it arc upward, knowing with the sick certainty of someone who had seen too many things go wrong that it was going to hit the crown. The sacred crown of ages had protected the Zephyrian Empire for 10,000 years. It had weathered wars and plagues, the rise and fall of dynasties, the birth and death of stars. It had been blessed by every high priest of their religion and empowered by rituals older than human civilization. It was supposed to be unbreakable. The knife hit it dead center, with a sound like breaking crystal. For a moment, everything stopped. The crown hung in the air, a hairline crack running from top to bottom. The Zephyrians stared in absolute silence, their faces showing the kind of shock that comes when the impossible happens right before your eyes. Then, the crown exploded. The blast of energy knocked everyone in the chamber to the ground. Marcus felt it wash over him like a wave of pure force, hot and cold at the same time, tasting of lightning and starfire. The walls of the temple shook, and somewhere in the distance, alarms began to wail. When the light faded and Marcus could see again, the altar was empty except for broken chains. The girl was gone, vanished in the explosion. The platform where the crown had hung was scorched black, and tiny fragments of what had once been the most sacred artifact in the Zephyrian Empire lay scattered across the floor like fallen stars. The Zephyrians began to stand up slowly, their movements careful and shocked. Marcus felt hundreds of dark eyes turning toward him, and he realized that breaking their most sacred artifact might not have been his smartest move. But then he remembered the girl on the altar and the knife raised to strike, and he decided he didn't care. One of the priests, his robes torn and his face pale with shock, pointed a shaking finger at Marcus. When he spoke, his voice carried across the silent chamber like a death sentence. "Destroyer," he whispered in accented English, "breaker of the sacred, ender of the eternal line." Marcus stood up slowly, his hands raised in a gesture that he hoped looked peaceful. Blood ran down his face from where he had hit the floor, and his uniform was torn in a dozen places. He probably looked like exactly what he was, a human soldier who had just destroyed something irreplaceable. "Look," he said, his voice echoing in the vast chamber. "I'm sorry about your crown, but I couldn't let you hurt that girl. Where I come from, we don't sacrifice children, no matter how sacred the ceremony." The priest's eyes went wide, and Marcus realized he had just made things worse. Apparently, assumptions about child sacrifice were not the best way to start diplomatic relations with an alien empire. Before anyone could respond, the air in the chamber began to shimmer. Marcus had seen enough alien technology to know when something big was about to happen. He took a step back, his hand moving instinctively toward his weapon. The shimmer grew brighter, and suddenly the air itself tore open like fabric. Through the tear stepped figures that made the temple priests look ordinary. They wore armor that seemed to be made of liquid starlight, and their faces were hidden behind masks of polished metal. But it was the figure who stepped through last that made every Zephyrian in the chamber fall to their knees. She was tall, even for a Zephyrian, with skin like polished ivory and hair that moved like silver flame. Her armor was black as space itself, set with jewels that pulsed like heartbeats. But it was her eyes that caught Marcus's attention. They were ancient and powerful and absolutely furious. Queen Lorelei Nethys, ruler of 47 worlds and empress of the Zephyrian Empire, had come to see what had happened to her crown. Her gaze swept across the ruined chamber, taking in the broken altar, the scattered fragments of the crown, and the terrified faces of her subjects. When her eyes finally settled on Marcus, he felt like he was being examined by something vast and alien and completely beyond his understanding. "You," she said, and her voice was like music played on instruments made of crystal and starfire. "You are the destroyer." Marcus straightened his shoulders and met her gaze directly. He had faced down warlords and pirates, alien monsters and human tyrants. He wasn't about to be intimidated by royalty, no matter how impressive they looked. "I'm Sergeant Marcus Chen, United Earth Marine Corps," he said. "And if stopping a child sacrifice makes me a destroyer, then I guess I am." The Queen's expression didn't change, but Marcus felt the temperature in the chamber drop by several degrees. Around them, the Zephyrians pressed their faces to the floor, as if they could disappear into the stone itself. "Child sacrifice," the Queen repeated slowly. "Is that what you believe you witnessed here?" Something in her tone made Marcus pause. He looked around the chamber again, noting details he had missed in his rush to act. The altar wasn't stained with blood. The chains were made of silver, not iron. The knife the priest had raised was curved wrong for killing, designed more for cutting than stabbing. "Wasn't it?" he asked, though he was beginning to suspect he had made a terrible mistake. Queen Lorelei stepped closer, and Marcus caught a scent like ozone and winter stars. When she spoke again, her voice was soft, but carried the weight of absolute authority. "The sacred crown of ages was the source of our empire's power," she said. "For 10,000 years, it has protected our worlds and our people. The ceremony you interrupted was the ritual of choosing, where the crown would select its next guardian from among our young. The girl you thought you were saving was about to become the most honored person in our empire." Marcus felt his stomach drop toward his boots. "So the chains? Ceremonial, to show her willingness to be bound to service. The knife was to cut those chains once the crown accepted her. And the screaming? Joy, terror. The emotions of someone about to be chosen by the divine." The Queen's eyes never left his face. "Tell me, Sergeant Chen of Earth, do you understand what you have done?" Marcus looked around the chamber again. The broken fragments of the crown caught the light like tears. The priest he had tackled was being helped to his feet by others, his face showing hurt more than anger. And somewhere, a young girl who should have been chosen for the highest honor in her society had vanished in an explosion of power that was entirely his fault. "I screwed up," he said quietly. "I screwed up really, really badly." "Yes," Queen Lorelei agreed. "You did." She moved closer still, and Marcus could see his reflection in her dark eyes. He looked small and foolish and very, very human. "The sacred crown of ages has been destroyed," she continued. "Our empire's protection is gone. Our people are vulnerable to enemies who have waited centuries for this moment. And it is all because one human soldier could not understand what he was seeing." Marcus wanted to defend himself, to explain that he had only been trying to help, that any decent person would have done the same thing. But looking at the devastation around him, at the faces of the Zephyrians who had trusted in their crown's protection for generations, the words died in his throat. "However," the Queen said, and her voice took on a different tone, one that made Marcus's skin prickle with warning. "There are laws older than the crown, laws that even I must follow. You have broken something sacred, Sergeant Chen, and according to those laws, you now belong to me. Marcus blinked. I'm sorry. What? The Queen smiled. And Marcus realized that an angry alien empress was terrifying, but a smiling alien empress was absolutely horrifying. The law of sacred destruction, she said, written in the first days of our empire. If someone destroys a sacred artifact, their life becomes forfeit to the crown. Since there is no longer a crown, that debt passes to me, personally. And that means? It means, Sergeant Marcus Chen of Earth, that you are mine. Your life, your service, your very existence belongs to me for the next 1,000 years. The chamber fell completely silent. Marcus could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears and the distant sound of air recyclers humming in the walls. He looked at the Queen's face, searching for any sign that she might be joking. He didn't find one. 1,000 years? He managed. 1,000 years, she confirmed. You will serve as my personal guard, my advisor, my... She paused, as if choosing her words carefully. Companion. You will go where I go, live where I live, and obey my commands without question. And perhaps, if you serve well enough, you might help me find a way to restore what you have destroyed. Marcus thought about his life back on Earth. His small apartment, his job training new recruits, his plans to retire to a quiet farm somewhere. He thought about the next 1,000 years of his life spent in service to an alien queen whose power he couldn't even comprehend. Then he thought about the girl on the altar, and the fear in her eyes, and the choice he had made without thinking. Do I get a choice in this? He asked. Queen Lyrale's smile widened, showing teeth that were just a little too sharp to be entirely reassuring. You made your choice when you destroyed my crown, she said. Now you get to live with the consequences. She raised one hand, and Marcus felt something shift in the air around him. It was like a collar made of invisible chains, binding him to her will with bonds stronger than steel. Welcome to your new life, Marcus Chen, she said. I do hope you find it educational. The imperial palace of Nethys Prime made the temple look like a garden shed. Marcus stood in the Queen's private chambers, still wearing his torn marine uniform, feeling completely out of place among the floating furniture and walls that changed color with Queen Lyrale's moods. Right now, they were a deep purple that Marcus was learning meant she was thinking hard about something unpleasant. It had been 3 days since the crown incident, and Marcus was beginning to understand just how badly he had miscalculated. The Zephyrian Empire wasn't just another alien civilization. It was a carefully balanced house of cards that had been held together by the crown's power for 10,000 years. Without it, everything was starting to fall apart. Reports are coming in from the outer colonies, Queen Lyrale said, not looking up from the holographic displays that floated around her desk. The Valdris Consortium has already begun testing our border defenses. The Hive worlds are mobilizing their fleets, and the Rogue AI Collective has started jamming our communications. Marcus stood at attention near the window, watching ships come and go from the palace spaceport below. He had tried to be helpful, offering tactical advice from his military experience. But Queen Lyrale had made it clear that his job was to stand there and look appropriately guilty while she dealt with the mess he had created. Your Majesty, he began, but she cut him off with a gesture. What do you know about power, Sergeant Chen? The question caught him off guard. Ma'am? She finally looked up from her displays, and Marcus saw exhaustion in her dark eyes. The Queen was beautiful, he couldn't deny that, but she was also clearly under enormous pressure. Her silver hair seemed less bright than it had in the temple, and her armor had been replaced with simpler robes that somehow made her look more human and more alien at the same time. Power, she repeated, not strength or weapons or armies, real power. The kind that holds an empire together, Marcus thought about it seriously. He had served under good officers and bad ones, had seen strong leaders and weak ones, had watched governments rise and fall across a dozen worlds. Respect, he said finally. Fear helps in the short term, but respect is what makes people follow you when things get tough. And trust. People need to believe you'll keep your word, even when it costs you. Something flickered in the Queen's expression, almost like surprise. An interesting answer from someone who just destroyed the foundation of my empire's respect and trust. Yes, ma'am, I know. She stood and walked to the window beside him. Up close, Marcus could smell that winter star's scent again, and he could see that her skin really did have a slight shimmer to it, like scales made of light. The sacred crown wasn't just a symbol, she said quietly. It was connected to every major system in our empire, defense networks, communication arrays, trade route protections. Without it, we're not just vulnerable to attack. We're vulnerable to complete collapse. Marcus felt the weight of that responsibility settle on his shoulders like a lead blanket. How long do we have? We? She glanced at him, one eyebrow raised. You're learning to think like my advisor already. You said I belonged to you for 1,000 years. If the empire falls apart in the next few months, that's going to make my service pretty short. To his surprise, Queen Lirelei laughed. It was a sound like silver bells, beautiful and completely unexpected. True enough, she said, and to answer your question, weeks, perhaps a few months at most. The outer colonies will declare independence first, then the core worlds will start making deals with our enemies to protect themselves. By year's end, the Zephyrian Empire will be a footnote in galactic history. Unless we can find another source of power to replace the crown. She turned to face him fully. Which brings me to why I really claimed you, Sergeant Chen. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. Ma'am, you destroyed something that was supposed to be indestructible. That tells me one of two things. Either you're incredibly lucky or there's something different about humans that we don't understand yet. Before Marcus could respond, an alarm began sounding throughout the palace. The Queen's walls flashed from purple to bright red, and her holographic displays immediately changed to show tactical information. What is it? Marcus asked, his military training kicking in automatically. The Valdris Consortium, Queen Lirelei said, her voice tight with anger. They've attacked one of our mining colonies in the Outer Reach. 3,000 casualties. Marcus studied the tactical display. He had dealt with the Valdris before, mercenary scavengers who preyed on weakened civilizations. They were cowards who only attacked when they thought they could win easily. They're testing you, he said, seeing how fast you can respond, how strong your defenses are without the crown. I know what they're doing, the Queen snapped. The question is what I can do about it. My fleets are spread thin across 47 worlds. By the time I can get ships to the Outer Reach, the colony will be stripped bare. Marcus looked at the display again, noting the positions of various fleet elements. An idea began to form in his mind, based on tactics he had learned fighting pirates in the asteroid belts around Earth. What if you don't send a fleet? He said. Queen Lirelei stared at him. What? The Valdris expect you to respond like an empire, with massive force and overwhelming firepower. But what if you responded like a smaller power? Something they're not prepared for? Explain. Marcus pointed to the tactical display. You have a patrol ship here, about 4 hours from the attack site. Not much firepower, but fast and maneuverable. Instead of trying to fight the Valdris fleet directly, what if you used it to hit their supply lines? The Queen studied the display more carefully. The Valdris ships need to refuel and resupply at their base in the Crimson Nebula. But that base is heavily defended. Not against a single ship it isn't. Heavy defenses are designed to stop fleets, not individuals. One ship, fast and smart, could get through their perimeter and cause enough damage to force the raiders back. Queen Lyreley was quiet for a long moment, her eyes moving between the tactical display and Marcus's face. Finally, she touched a control on her desk, and a communication channel opened. "Admiral Zephys," she said. "Yes, Your Majesty? I want you to send the patrol ship Starwind to these coordinates." She transmitted Marcus's suggested attack plan. "They are to strike fast and withdraw immediately." "Your Majesty, the Starwind is just a patrol ship. She can't possibly—" "She can if she's smart about it," the Queen interrupted. "Trust me on this, Admiral." "Yes, Your Majesty." The channel closed, and Queen Lyreley turned back to Marcus. "If this works, you may have just saved 3,000 lives. And if it doesn't, then we'll have lost a patrol ship and proven that humans make terrible military advisors." They waited in tense silence for the next 6 hours. Marcus found himself pacing near the window while Queen Lyreley worked through reports from across the Empire. More attacks were being launched on the borders, and colony governors were sending increasingly desperate requests for protection. Finally, Admiral Zephys called back. "Your Majesty, the Starwind has successfully completed its mission. The Valdris base has been crippled, and their raiding fleet is withdrawing from the outer reach." Marcus saw the Queen's shoulders relax slightly. "Casualties? None to our forces, Your Majesty. The Valdris were completely unprepared for the attack vector the Starwind used." "Excellent work, Admiral." After the communication ended, Queen Lyreley looked at Marcus with something that might have been respect. "Where did you learn tactics like that?" "Fighting pirates around Earth's asteroid belt," Marcus said. "Same principle. When you're outnumbered and outgunned, you don't fight fair, you fight smart." "And you think that approach could work on a larger scale?" Marcus considered the question seriously. "Depends on how flexible your commanders are. The Valdris and your other enemies are expecting you to act like a traditional empire. If you can break their expectations, keep them guessing, you might buy enough time to find a replacement for the crown." Queen Lyreley stood and walked to a wall covered in what looked like star charts. Marcus realized they were maps of her empire, showing trade routes and defense positions across dozens of worlds. "There is a legend," she said without turning around, "an old story about the time before the crown, when the Zephyrian people were just one tribe among many on our homeworld. They say that in those days, we had a different kind of power, not magic or technology, but something else, something that came from who we were as a people. What happened to it? We became civilized. We built cities and ships and eventually an empire. The crown gave us power over others, but perhaps we lost power over ourselves." Marcus thought about Earth, about humanity's long climb from tribes to nations to star travelers. Maybe that's not entirely a bad thing. Power over others eventually corrupts. But power over yourself, that's something nobody can take away. The Queen turned to look at him, and Marcus saw something in her expression that he hadn't seen before. Not anger or authority or alien distance, but genuine curiosity. "You speak as if you have experience with corruption." "I've seen what happens when people get too much power," Marcus said. "Officers who start thinking they're gods, politicians who forget they're supposed to serve the people. It never ends well." "And yet you serve me without question." Marcus met her gaze directly. "I don't serve you without question, Your Majesty. I serve you because I owe you a debt. There's a difference." For a moment, the room was completely silent. Then Queen Lyreley smiled. Not the terrifying smile from the temple, but something warmer and more genuine. "You are a very strange human, Marcus Chen." "So I've been told, ma'am." Their conversation was interrupted by another alarm, this one different from the first. The Queen's walls flashed yellow, and new displays appeared showing internal security alerts. "What now?" Marcus asked. Queen Lyrale's expression darkened as she read the reports. Trouble closer to home. Several governors are demanding an emergency session of the Imperial Council. They want to discuss transitional authority in the wake of the crown's destruction. Transitional authority? A polite way of saying they want to remove me from power and divide my empire among themselves. She touched her desk controls, bringing up files on the governors in question. They think that without the crown, I'm vulnerable. Marcus studied the political profiles appearing on the displays. Governor Thane of the Industrial Worlds, Governor Valixia of the Agricultural Colonies, Governor Crean of the Mining Confederation. All of them controlled resources essential to the Empire's survival. Are they right? He asked. Queen Lyrale gave him a sharp look. About what? About you being vulnerable. Politically, I mean. Without the crown, what keeps these governors loyal? Tradition. Law. Fear of the consequences of rebellion. But if they're already talking about transitional authority, those things aren't working anymore. The Queen was quiet for a long moment, and Marcus realized he might have pushed too far. He was still learning the boundaries of his new role, still figuring out what questions he was allowed to ask. You're right, she said finally. They smell weakness, and they're moving to exploit it. In 3 days, they'll convene the emergency council session. They'll present a vote of no confidence in my ability to lead without the crown's power. And if they win? Then the Zephyrian Empire becomes the Zephyrian Republic, with power shared among the governors. Within a year, it will break apart into separate nations. Within 5 years, those nations will be at war with each other. Marcus thought about Earth's history, about the rise and fall of empires and the chaos that often followed. Unless you can prove that you don't need the crown, that you have another kind of power. And how would you suggest I do that? Marcus looked at the tactical displays, still showing the aftermath of the Star Wind's successful mission. An idea began to form. Dangerous and probably stupid, but maybe crazy enough to work. You said the crown connected you to every major system in the Empire, he said slowly. Yes. But those connections still exist, don't they? The infrastructure is still there, just not powered. The crown was the central node that made it all work. Without it, the systems are isolated and vulnerable. What if you could create a new central node? Not a crown, but something else. Something that couldn't be destroyed by accident. Queen Lyrale stared at him. The amount of power required would be enormous. And the knowledge needed to create such a thing was lost thousands of years ago. Maybe. But you said yourself that I destroyed something that was supposed to be indestructible. Maybe there's something about humans, about the way we interact with your technology, that could make it possible. The Queen walked back to her desk and brought up new displays, showing the technical specifications of the Crown's power systems. Marcus couldn't read the alien text, but he could see energy patterns and connection diagrams that looked familiar from his training with Earth's quantum communication networks. It would be incredibly dangerous, she said. If we tried and failed, it could kill everyone in the attempt. And if we don't try, your empire falls apart anyway. Queen Lyrale looked at him for a long time, and Marcus could see her weighing options in her mind. Finally, she made a decision that would change everything. Very well, she said. We'll attempt it, but not here, and not alone. If we're going to risk everything on a desperate gamble, we'll need help from the one person who might understand both human nature and ancient Zephyrian power systems. Who's that? The Queen's smile returned, and this time it was definitely terrifying. The girl you tried to save in the temple, the one who was supposed to be chosen by the crown. Her name is Zara Nethys, and she's my daughter. Princess Zara Nethys was not what Marcus had expected. He had imagined a typical royal daughter, pampered, sheltered, maybe a little resentful about having her ceremony interrupted. Instead, He found himself facing a 12-year-old girl who looked at him with the same measuring gaze as her mother, but with something else behind it. Something that reminded him of himself when he was young and angry at the world. They met in the deep archive beneath the palace, in a chamber that hadn't been opened in over 1,000 years. Ancient crystals provided dim lighting, and the walls were covered with symbols that seemed to move when Marcus wasn't looking directly at them. Queen Lyralee stood beside a table covered with fragments of the destroyed crown, while her daughter sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by books that looked older than human civilization. "So you're the one who broke everything?" Zara said in perfect English, not looking up from her reading. "That's me," Marcus replied. "Sorry about ruining your big day." "You didn't ruin it," she said, finally glancing up. "You made it interesting." Queen Lyralee cleared her throat. "Zara has been studying the Crown's power system since she was old enough to read. She knows more about ancient Zephyrian energy manipulation than anyone alive." "Because I was supposed to bond with it," Zara added. "The crown doesn't just sit on someone's head and look pretty. It becomes part of them, changes them, makes them something more than they were." Marcus felt a chill. "Changes them how?" "The crown bearers live for thousands of years," Queen Lyralee explained. "They gain abilities that seem like magic to outsiders. The power to see across vast distances, to sense threats to the empire, to channel energy through the network of systems connected to the crown. They also stop being entirely themselves," Zara said quietly. "Every crown bearer in history became more focused on the empire's needs than on individual people. It's necessary for ruling 47 worlds, but it costs them their humanity, or in our case, their Zephyrianity." Marcus looked at the young princess with new understanding. "You weren't terrified of the ceremony because you were going to be hurt. You were terrified because you were going to lose yourself." "Smart human," Zara said with a slight smile. "Mother never understood that part. She sees the crown as power and responsibility. I saw it as a prison." Queen Lyralee's expression tightened. "The empire requires sacrifice from its rulers. That has always been the way." "Maybe," Zara said, standing and brushing dust off her simple clothes. "But maybe there's another way. That's why we're here, isn't it? To find a different kind of power?" Marcus looked between mother and daughter, seeing the tension that had existed long before he crashed into their lives. "What exactly are you proposing?" Queen Lyralee gestured to the crown fragments on the table. "The crown's power came from its connection to ancient energy sources throughout the empire. Quantum entanglement networks that we no longer fully understand. When you destroyed it, those connections were severed. But the endpoints still exist," Zara continued. "Power sources on every major world, waiting for something to reconnect them. The crown was just one way to create that connection." "And the other way is?" Marcus asked. "Living networks," Queen Lyralee said. "Instead of one person bonding with a single artifact, multiple people sharing the connection, distributing the load and the responsibility." Marcus thought about Earth's quantum communication networks, about the teams of technicians who maintained them, and the backup systems that kept them running. "Like a biological computer network." "Something like that," Zara said. "But it requires people who can handle the energy without being consumed by it. People who are naturally resistant to the kind of power that turned the crown bearers into living statues." "And you think humans might be resistant?" "You destroyed the crown," Queen Lyralee pointed out. "The energy release should have killed you instantly. Instead, you walked away without a scratch." Marcus remembered the explosion in the temple, the feeling of energy washing over him like fire and lightning. At the time, he had been too focused on the immediate danger to think about it much. Now, looking back, he realized she was right, that much raw power should have reduced him to ash. "So the plan is what? Turn me into some kind of living power source?" Not just you, Zara said, her eyes lighting up with excitement. The network needs multiple nodes to function properly. Mother and I would be part of it too, along with others we trust, but humans might be the key to making it stable. How many humans? Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. All of them, Queen Lirelei said. Every human in known space would need to be connected to the network. The more nodes we have, the more stable the system becomes. Marcus felt his blood run cold. You're talking about enslaving my entire species. No, Zara said quickly. Not enslaving. Partnering. The network would give humans access to Zephyrian technology, extended lifespans, the ability to travel between star systems instantly. In return, you would help us maintain stability across the Empire. And if we refuse? Queen Lyralei's expression hardened. Then the Empire falls, the galaxy descends into war, and billions die, including most of humanity, when the various successor states decide that Earth's resources are worth fighting over. Marcus walked to the far side of the chamber, staring at symbols on the wall that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. He thought about his home world, about the billions of humans who had no idea their fate was being decided in a crystal chamber beneath an alien palace. There has to be another option, he said. If there is, we haven't found it, Queen Lirelei replied. The Emergency Council meets in 2 days. If I can't demonstrate some form of power by then, they'll vote me out and the Empire will fragment. Our enemies are already massing at the borders, waiting for that moment. What about a smaller network? Marcus asked. Just the people in this room? 3 people couldn't handle the energy load, Zara said. The feedback would kill us all within hours. Then what about volunteers? Humans who choose to join willingly? There aren't enough volunteers in the galaxy to make it work, Queen Lirelei said. The network needs millions of connected minds to remain stable. Marcus turned back to face them, and he saw something in their expressions that he hadn't noticed before. They looked tired, defeated, like people who had already accepted that there were no good choices left. You know what I think? He said. What? Queen Lirelei asked. I think you're both so focused on saving the Empire that you've forgotten what empires are supposed to do. Mother and daughter exchanged glances. Which is? Zara asked. Serve the people, not the other way around. Marcus walked back to the table with the crown fragments. An empire that can only survive by enslaving entire species isn't worth saving. So you condemn billions to war and death for the sake of human independence? Queen Lyralei's voice was cold with anger. I condemn an empire that thinks it has the right to make that choice for them, Marcus shot back. Maybe the galaxy would be better off without the Zephyrian Empire. Maybe it's time for something new. The chamber fell silent except for the humming of the ancient crystals. Marcus could feel the weight of Queen Lyralei's stare and the intensity of Zara's curiosity. You would really let it all fall apart? The Queen asked quietly. If the alternative is turning my species into biological components in your power grid? Yeah, I would. Even knowing that the chaos could destroy Earth as well? Marcus thought about that for a long moment. He thought about his home world, about the people he had sworn to protect, about the choice between freedom and security that every generation had to make. Yeah, he said finally, even knowing that. To his surprise, Zara suddenly grinned. I like him, Mother. He's got backbone. This is not a game, Zara, Queen Lirelei snapped. Isn't it? Her daughter replied. We're sitting in a room full of ancient power sources, talking about forcing entire species into a network they don't want to join, all to preserve an empire that maybe doesn't deserve to exist anymore. That sounds like a game to me, a stupid, dangerous game that we're going to lose. Then what do you suggest? The Queen demanded. Zara stood up and walked to one of the crystal formations on the wall. When she touched it, it flared brighter, and Marcus felt something like an electric shock run through his nervous system. I suggest we cheat, she said. The crystal she was touching began to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat, and Marcus realized that the princess had been hiding something important from both of them. "Zara," Queen Lirelei said, her voice tight with warning. "What did you do?" "I bonded with some of the crown fragments," Zara said, not looking at them. "Not completely, not like the full ceremony would have done, but enough to understand how the power systems really work." "That's incredibly dangerous," her mother said. "The partial bonding could kill you." "It could," Zara agreed. "But it also showed me something interesting. The crown wasn't the real power source. It was just a control system." Marcus felt the pieces clicking together in his mind. The real power comes from the planets themselves. "Exactly," Zara said, turning back to them. The crystal behind her continued to pulse, and Marcus could see faint lines of energy running through her skin like veins of light. "Every world in the Empire has natural energy sources that the Crown learned to tap into. Geothermal, magnetic, even stellar radiation focused through crystal networks. But without the Crown to coordinate them," Queen Lirelei began. "They don't need coordination," Zara interrupted. "They need cooperation. The Crown forced them to work together. But what if they chose to work together instead?" Marcus stared at the princess, beginning to understand what she was suggesting. "You want to ask the planets for help." "Not the planets," she said. "The people living on them. Every world in the Empire has citizens who benefit from the power networks. What if they became willing participants instead of passive consumers?" Queen Lirelei looked skeptical. "The population of 47 worlds? That's billions of people. You couldn't possibly connect them all to a power network without massive infrastructure." "Not a power network," Zara said, her eyes bright with excitement. "A communication network. People sharing information, coordinating responses to threats, working together because they choose to, not because some crown is forcing them to." Marcus thought about Earth's early internet, about how it had connected billions of people and allowed them to share knowledge and coordinate actions on a global scale. But this would be bigger, a galactic-scale network of willing participants. "It could work," he said slowly. "But you'd need something to bootstrap the process, some way to prove to people that cooperation is better than domination." "The Emergency Council," Queen Lirelei said, understanding beginning to dawn in her expression. "If I could demonstrate a new form of power, one based on choice rather than compulsion." "The governors would have to reconsider," Zara agreed. "And if enough worlds chose to participate willingly, the network effect would make everyone stronger, not just the rulers." Marcus looked at both of them, seeing the possibility of something unprecedented. An empire that actually served its people instead of exploiting them. "What do you need me to do?" he asked. Queen Lirelei smiled, and this time it wasn't terrifying at all. "Help us convince the Council that humanity is ready to be a true partner in this galaxy, not just another conquered species." The Emergency Council convened in the Grand Assembly Chamber, a vast hall that could hold representatives from all 47 worlds of the Empire. Governor Thane arrived with a fleet of warships. Governor Velixia brought economic data showing the Empire's declining trade revenues. Governor Kryn presented military reports about border incursions and defensive failures. They all expected Queen Lirelei to appear weakened and desperate, ready to negotiate away her power in exchange for their continued support. Instead, she arrived with Marcus Chen and Princess Zara at her sides, and she carried herself like someone who had just discovered a secret that changed everything. "Governors," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the massive chamber. "You called this session to discuss transitional authority in the wake of the Crown's destruction. Before we begin those discussions, I want to show you something." She gestured to Zara, who stepped forward and placed her hand on a crystal formation built into the chamber floor. Immediately, holographic displays appeared throughout the hall, showing real-time data from across the Empire. For 10,000 years, Queen Lyreley continued. We have ruled through the power of the sacred crown. It forced our worlds to work together, channeled their energy into a single network controlled from this palace. But force is not the only way to achieve unity. The displays shifted, showing communication networks springing to life across the empire. Not the old, crown-controlled systems, but something new. Voluntary connections between worlds. People choosing to share information and coordinate their efforts. In the past week, Zara said, her voice young but confident, we have contacted leaders on every major world in the empire. We told them the truth about the crown's destruction and asked them to make a choice. They could wait for the empire to collapse and fight over the pieces, or they could work together to build something better. The displays showed the responses, thousands of them, from governors and mayors, scientists and farmers, military commanders and ordinary citizens. Not everyone had agreed to participate, but enough had to create a network that spanned half the galaxy. This is impossible, Governor Thane protested. The infrastructure for such a network doesn't exist. It does now, Marcus said, speaking for the first time since entering the chamber. Humanity has agreed to serve as communication nodes for the network. Our quantum-resistant neurology makes us natural coordinators for interstellar data streams. And in return, Governor Valixia asked suspiciously. Full membership in a new kind of empire? Queen Lyreley replied. One where power flows from the consent of the governed, not from ancient artifacts or divine right. Humanity becomes our partners, not our subjects, and any world that chooses to participate gets the same offer. The governors looked at each other, clearly not having expected this development. Marcus could see them trying to calculate whether this new arrangement would give them more or less influence than the old system. You're asking us to trust aliens, Governor Kryn said, to make humans equal partners in our government. I'm asking you to recognize that strength comes from cooperation, not domination, Queen Lyreley replied. The crown made us powerful, but it also made us brittle. One broken artifact nearly destroyed everything we had built. This new network can't be broken by any single failure. Because it's not a single point of control, Zara added. It's millions of people choosing to work together. If some of them change their minds, the network adapts. If some of them are lost to war or disaster, others can take their place. Marcus watched the debate that followed, seeing the governors struggle with the idea of sharing power with their subjects instead of ruling over them. Some of them would never accept it. He could see that in their faces. But others were beginning to understand the possibilities. The vote, when it finally came, was closer than he had hoped, but wider than he had feared. 28 worlds chose to join the new network. 19 decided to remain independent. Several governors chose exile rather than accept the new arrangement. It wasn't perfect, but it was a beginning. Later, as Marcus stood in Queen Lyreley's chambers watching the first data streams flow through the new network, he reflected on how much had changed in just a few weeks. Regrets? The Queen asked, joining him at the window. About breaking your crown? No. About the people who died in the border wars while we figured this out? Yeah, definitely. Those deaths would have happened anyway, she said quietly. Probably more of them, and for much longer. What we've built here gives us a chance to prevent future wars, not just postpone them. Marcus nodded, but he still felt the weight of those early decisions. What happens now? Now we see if an empire based on choice can survive in a galaxy full of empires based on force, Queen Lyreley replied. The Valdris Consortium is still out there. So are the Hive Worlds and the Rogue AI Collective. They'll test us soon enough. And if they do? She smiled, and Marcus realized that he had stopped finding her smiles terrifying. Then they'll discover that an empire of willing participants fights very differently than an empire of subjects. People who choose to defend something fight harder than people who are forced to. Zara appeared in the doorway, her skin still showing faint traces of the energy lines from her partial crown bonding. The first coordination test is ready, she announced. Defensive systems across all participating worlds are responding to unified commands. How's it feel? Marcus asked her. Being partially bonded to an ancient power source? Like having a song stuck in your head, she replied with a grin. But a song that connects me to millions of other voices. It's actually kind of beautiful. Marcus looked out at the ships moving through the spaceport below, many of them carrying the new partnership treaties to worlds throughout the galaxy. In a few years, humanity would have a voice in galactic politics for the first time. In a few decades, they might help shape the direction of multiple civilizations. So, he said to Queen Lyrelay, about that 1,000-year service contract. What about it? Do I get vacation time? Both the Queen and her daughter laughed, and Marcus decided that maybe belonging to an alien empire wouldn't be so bad after all, especially one that he had helped create. Outside the palace, the first human Zephyrian diplomatic ships were launching toward Earth, carrying news of humanity's new role in galactic civilization. Marcus watched them disappear into the star-filled darkness and wondered what his fellow humans would think when they learned that their future had been decided by a Marine who couldn't tell the difference between a sacrifice and a ceremony. Probably they'd understand. After all, most of humanity's best decisions had started with someone breaking something they weren't supposed to touch. And in the end, that was the most human thing of all.